All right, so I'm going to go ahead and start the evening. Hello and welcome to everyone. Welcome to Culture Quest. Culture Quest is a virtual series featuring professionals from all disciplines, writing, visual arts, and performing arts. A 45-minute presentation is followed by a Q&A session, and all talks spring from the theme, How I Got Here. Proudbridge Library is proud to welcome poet Jennifer Jean in celebration of National Poetry Month. Jennifer Jean's poetry collections include Booze, Object Lesson, and The Fool. Her poetry, prose, and translations appear in Poetry Magazine, Rattle Magazine, The Common, Los Angeles Review, and many more. Welcome, Jennifer, and thank you for joining us this evening.
Thank you so much, Jennifer. I'm happy to be here and happy to talk about this topic of how I got here in my artist life, especially as it is National Poetry Month, as you said. So this is perfect timing. And so at the end, I was told there's a Q&A. If there are any holes in anything I say, if I happen to rush through some topic and you're like, wait a second, what did you mean by that? Just feel free to ask me at the end. That's totally fine. So I'm going to do the very predictable thing and start with where I was born. Just start chronologically. So quite a while ago, I was born in Venice, California, and my parents were hippies, and they were very into the Venice culture that was going on at the time. They were part of that whole post Vietnam, free love, very into peace, and all those other kinds of attendant things. And I actually found out years later that they were never actually married. They were called common law husband and wife. They were not actually married. I don't know if they believed in marriage or what it was, but they called each other husband and wife. They felt like each other were soulmates, but they were never actually married. And so my dad, he was a Vietnam War veteran, and they met after he traveled from East Providence, where he grew up. After the war, he traveled from East Providence to California, just like a lot of young people did at that time. And he fell in with a group of poets. Actually, he wasn't a poet himself, but he was, vibing with the artist scene. At the time, there were a lot of musicians hanging out also in Venice, including the band The Doors. They were there. My dad apparently was obsessed with them. And I'm going to bring this up later, actually towards the end, his obsession. So he was very into that. He was a drummer, but he didn't have any profession. He wasn't really pursuing anything particular. He was just being, I think he was living off of his veterans checks, and he was, somewhat stable at that time, stable enough to meet with my mom and be together with her. And she was very vulnerable. She'd been through a lot actually in her life, a lot of things that she won't even tell me these days or only hint at. So they were both very vulnerable, somewhat disturbed in some ways, people that found each other and called each other soulmates and started a family. And it was really misguided, actually, because they couldn't maintain, too much normalcy with all the craziness of that time period going on in the early 70s. So what ended up happening was I have an older brother. He's actually since passed on, but he's less than 1 year older than I am. I think they call it around here Irish twins. So we're very close in age. So they had my older brother, and then they had me. And after they had me, they actually quite a bit started to break down in their lives. And this is really significant. I'm spending a lot of time in the beginning of my life. I'm going to skip over a bunch of other things because this is something that affected my life as an artist, like very, very much. So they had a lot of struggles. My dad his PTSD from his war experiences was progressing. And my mom was just, as I said, very vulnerable. And she didn't know how to help him. They were very, very young. And she just kind of went along with it. And she used to describe their relationship as a cult of two. Like they were just had their own language, had their own things that they would do, like oddities, and it just became very extreme. And it got to a point where she actually didn't leave the house for a long time, or the apartment. They lived in an apartment, and she didn't leave. And he would go off and he would disappear for, a long periods of time. And nobody knew where he was, and he would, come back at all hours, and all kinds of strange things were happening. And there's, by the way, two babies there at that time. So at some point, the manager of the apartment building called the police, and they had to break in, and they found like utter disarray, and like my brother and I were malnourished actually, and possibly had some kind of different abuse. I don't actually know. It's all like vague rumors for me. So there was this situation, and Child Protective Services had to be called in, and my brother and I were taken from our parents, and I believe they were jailed actually, and eventually both institutionalized. So my mom went to the regular people's institution. My dad went to a veterans institution. And my brother and I were together, thank God, and put in foster care. And so we went through a few homes actually. And I have no memory of this. So this happened when I was 7 months old. Okay. When we were taken from our parents. And eventually we were put into what they call kinship care. So kinship care is just a family member, but it's still a foster care situation. But finally, my father's mother took us in, and I remember her actually, and she wanted to adopt us. So while I was living there, I think I don't even know how old I was actually. I think 5 years old, maybe something like that. My father actually came to visit. So one of my earliest memories is actually of my father, but it's with the knowledge that he was usually not around and he was visiting. And so I was in East Providence, where he was from. That's where my grandmother lived. And he was visiting, and my clear memory is that we're in a car in the back seat, and there's just toys and books on the ground, and we're just sitting next to each other, super awkward. I know he's my dad. I feel like this guy is just strange. I feel like I have to be conversational. I was a very good little girl, by the way. Like, oh, I should talk to this man. And so I was trying to talk to him, and he was also very awkward, and he was trying to talk to me. And he just was kind of looking around like this, and he sees these books on the ground on the bottom of the car where we're seated in the back seat. And he just picks up one and he says, "Do you like to read?" And at the time, I don't think I could read. Well, if I was 5, I could read, but I don't think I had any particular interest in reading. Like, and I remember lying to him and saying, yes, I love to read. And he's like, oh, it was a conversation. It was something that we could talk about. And so he just said, oh, I don't know if he read to me. My memory just kind of blanks out after that, but I remember the lie, and I remember that moment. And I remember concentrating on trying to read more after that, and realizing I don't recognize all these words. I remember the process of learning to read. And when I've taught in colleges, I've asked students, do you remember learning to read? And we have these great conversations always. It's always different people. And so I encourage everybody that's here, like, think about, do you remember that process? And I talk to my son about it too. I remember teaching him, and I tell him how I taught him to read, and the whole process. It fascinates me because it changed my life. Just that question, the fact that he asked that, and the fact that I lied, and then I was a good girl, so I went with it, like, oh, I know I lied, I better love to read. And so what happens after that is my father eventually returned to California because he loved California. So he just left East Providence. I think my grandmother was hoping he would stay, but he didn't. And eventually I'm 7 years old, and my mom has since left, been released from the institution she was put in. She's recovered her life. She's healing, and she petitions to have my brother and I return to her custody. So there's this battle in court, my grandmother and my mom, and eventually the court awards custody to my mom. And I remember this, I'm 7 years old. So from 7 months to 7 years old, I have not been with my mom. I think I did see her once. I remember she visited also. And it was also awkward too. But in any case, I knew 7 years old, okay, I guess I'm with my, me and my brother, we're going to go fly to California. My grandmother's singing that song, like, California, here I come, because she's from that generation. And I just was so nervous. I didn't know what it was going to be like. To me, in my head, I was an East Coaster at a 7 years old. We go to California and we live in Los Angeles County. So Venice, California is essentially in LA County. And yeah, that's where my life just begins again. And it's very odd. But there's another touch point that has to do with reading. So my mom was able to, through scholarships, enroll just one of us, me, in Catholic school. We were living on welfare, and she was working. She always talked about working under the table, which for a kid, I just thought, why is she under a table? But what she meant was she was a house cleaner, and she was just getting paid under the table. So it was just a job that she would do without being taxed, I guess, so that she could get the welfare. Any case, she was able to enroll me in Catholic school. For some reason, not my brother. I never could figure out why. But that really changed my life. When I got to the school, the semester had already begun. They said, you've got to go to the library and pick out a book. And I remember the library and walking through, these, all the shelves, the bookshelves. I didn't know what to get. And the librarian just kind of said, oh, just pick something from over there. I guess it was my age range. And there was this whole row of yellow spined books. And I just reached out and I just picked one. And I just was like, I guess this is the one I'm going to get. And it was The Hidden Staircase, a Nancy Drew mystery. Okay, so I don't know if anyone here ever read those, but I just became obsessed with Nancy Drew. I wanted to be a detective because there were all these mysteries in my life. That was one thing. There were the adults didn't tell me anything. They said my dad was a drunk. I actually am not even sure if he actually was, but that was like a story they would tell me, say why he wasn't around. And then they would even say, like, well, he lives really far away. And then I finally asked, like, where does he live? And they would say Hollywood. And so Hollywood, in relation to where I lived in Los Angeles, was not that far away. I have to tell you, it was like 40 minutes away, but I never could see him, is what they told me. So there's all this stuff going on. And so I get this book and I just dove into books. And so the neighborhood we're living in at the time is quite bad. I have to tell you, it's a very, very bad neighborhood. We lived in Section 8 housing, which is government subsidized housing. Never a good idea. I don't know who the hell thought about that. Not good. It was all single mothers, except for some of the single mothers had their, second or third boyfriends. One of the fathers of one of their children would be living with them. That sometimes happened, but almost all, it was all single moms and all these kids, wild kids of single moms and some gangs that would be in this apartment building. And so, I think the fact that I was, for a kid, well read, it just gave me the idea of there's a life outside of this. Most of the kids didn't have that. My brother certainly didn't. He was very absorbed in this apartment building life, in this downtrodden life. He never became a gang member. I think it weirdly, because he wore glasses from a very young age, like really thick glasses. And so he was very uncool. And so he was very jokey, and that's how he would get by with things. Like he would make people laugh, but he never joined a gang. That's one thing good. But in that area, I just would look around. I would see no place for me. I knew that there are other places in the world, other realities. And so I would walk around literally like this with a book as protection for me. And that was really huge. And what I'm going to just take a moment really quick to read a poem about that time in my life. You can get an idea. It's from my book. Oops, sticky note. The Fool, my first book. And it's like, this book is like most first books about my childhood. That's what almost all poets do. First book talks about when they were younger. So this is called Garden Apartments in Canoga Park, California. 1, friends. We didn't go too far back into the tenement. We knew a curious woman had been shot by stray bullets. Poking her entire torso out a window, she invited in too much information. We didn't dare speak full words or open our faces in recognition. We squinted if we were smart. We pretended to believe all bravado, all bruises heroic, all bones twisted in triumph against brass knuckles, and the whole of a nameless gang. If we were weak, we made friends elsewhere, culling from the houses or duplex condos with foyers, chandeliers, blinds, and 2 incomes. But that was rare. 2, family. Our mothers spent stamps. Our mothers sagged in posterns, bummed smokes, talked crap, cocked chins to each other, to liars and lairless losers, ex-husbands and each baby's daddy. We saw our mothers as the evenings turned, lips serrated, eyes lit by sitcoms. We'd watch their halos bloom as stains of nicotine fanned out on walls above wicker chairs facing kitchen windows, each crown illuminating jowl rage. Everyone forgot how young they were, how close. 3, home. Some of us and our squalling children eventually moved upstairs or out back into the dead woman's place, her threadbare yellows and thick reds long since coated over. We'd live with local boys, having had sex as soon as we could be ashamed of being left out, as soon as we were 12 at least. We tried to wait in laundry rooms, cracked courts, blind alleys. We waited for someone to get a car to get out. Still, our souls, like our mothers, called the garden home. Wow, it's been a long time since I read that poem. But in any case, so that gives you an idea. And I used the we in that because I wanted to give, a sense of it had to be like that. I actually wasn't part of that we. That's a little ironic writing that. But to survive, everybody felt like we have to be a we all have to do the same thing. And when you step outside of that, you're a traitor. And so in a sense, I was like that. I felt like I had to slink in and out of the building. And even some kids didn't know who I was. And they asked my brother, he would tell me this. Different kids would say, who's that girl? And he would be like, that's my sister. And they'd be like, you have a sister? We didn't know, because I would desperately stay away from these people because I knew just through logic, because my mind was formed by reading, and reading does that to a brain. It creates logic pathways. If you're not reading and if you're not being educated and thinking about things like that, then you almost have no way of forming. Like my brother did not read like I did, and he had a lot more trouble than I did in trying to find his way out. He did somewhat find a pathway out, but anyways, his end was pretty bad. Like I said, he's passed on now. His end was pretty bad. But that's one thing that reading does. That's what it did for me. So as any great reader, I also wanted to be a writer, of course. You read these great books, you want to produce them. So yeah, I actually remember writing my first poem. I'm not gonna recite it unless somebody asks at the end, the first poem. I do remember it. Maybe later if people want. But a key thing is that I remember that first poem, but even more, I remember being 14 years old and finding these old papers that my mom had kept and reading poems I had written when I first got there back with her at 7 years old. So I'm 14 years old, reading poems from when I was 7 years old. They were for assignments that it wasn't like I was some genius child. They were assigned to me by teachers, but I was struck by it as a 14-year-old, like, oh. And I also read old report cards from when I lived with my grandmother, and they said that, she's a very vivacious child and like a leader of her friends. And at the time at 14, I was not like that. I was super shy. I couldn't speak up. I was hiding all the time. That was my life, was hiding. I was really, I was like, I don't remember any of this stuff that they're saying about me when I was very young, but it gave me hope that I could return to that again and speak in front of people like I'm doing right now. In any case, at 14, I began to write again, more of my own volition, not from assignments. And I just wrote like any teenager, all the angst, my life is horrible, this usual things. I don't remember those those poems because they're forgettable, because they're probably like many people's poems. But one thing that when I was that age, from 14 onwards, that's when high school starts, because I was such a great reader, I had trouble connecting with the people around me. As I said, at school, there was this international club that was populated by students that were exchange students from all over the world. And so I fell in with that crowd because they had reading cultures. And so it made sense to me, like, okay, these are my people. And I was very good friends with a girl from Japan, a girl from Sweden, a girl from Germany, um, from all over, just from everywhere. And a couple of the guys that I dated were from elsewhere. And that also changed my life. So reading led me to that. And the international, having this experience with people from an international community just affected my writing life later, which I'll get to. So after this, it was very tumultuous. I'm not going to go into, all the all the craziness of my life. That's too much. But I did face a lot of things. My life was going down kind of a dark path, but I was able to swerve it. So I'm not going to go into how so much as to say I was able to. I entered therapy. Otherwise, I couldn't have a smile on my face right now after many of the things that happened. But I entered therapy. I actually also found a prayer life. I started going to church. Those two things really helped me. But the arts also stayed with me. Writing still stayed with me. And when I went to college and I didn't know what I was going to do, I actually tried psych at first. And I was like, I'm not a scientist. But I tried psych because I was interested in the human condition. And when I realized that writing and studying literature, that's what it's about. Like I heard a teacher say it, I was like, oh, okay, of course, I'm going to switch to writing. That's my interest, and to creative writing and studying literature, so both. So fast forward to, I'm married, I have 2 kids. We moved to the Boston area where I live right now. I'm in Salem right now, which is just a half an hour north of Boston. And I'm at a church sermon. Okay. So I'm fast forwarding, but we're gonna go backtrack because some things will be revealed. Listening to a sermon, and it's a woman pastor, and she had just returned from Las Vegas, a trip there for a conference or something, I guess pastors conference. And she had this really horrible experience there where she had an encounter with human trafficking. She was in a bathroom. She entered the bathroom. There was a woman that was like very scantily clad, a lot of makeup on, was like, looked like she had OD'd or fainted or something. And there was a guy in there that was like smacking her face, trying to wake her up. And he was he wasn't paying any attention to the pastor. The pastor was like, "What are you doing here? What's wrong with her? I'm going to call the police or the ambulance or something. Like, we need to help her." And he just kept like elbowing her out of the way. And he picks up the girl, throws her over his, shoulder, like a fireman, like a sack of potatoes or like a fireman would, and just starts walking out of the bathroom with her. And the pastor's like following him. He's like, "Wait, who are you?" And she's trying to grab like any of the workers that they're passing, because they've got kind of a ways to go to the exit. And he's totally ignoring her. And she's pulling on him. She's like she's a little woman, by the way. She's trying to stop him. There's no way she could stop him. And the people that work there are like, "Yeah, this happens." And she's like, what, and the guy just throws the woman in a taxi. That's because it's a hotel. So they have the taxis that just pull up and drives off with this woman. Yeah. And so this pastor is like, I talked to the manager of the hotel, and they were explaining this is probably a situation of human trafficking, and there isn't much we could do about it. And so she was like, "What?" She felt powerless. And so she comes back, and this is her sermon. She's like, "I didn't know what to do. All I know is I need to tell all of you, just in case there's someone here that you could take on this mission." Because a lot of people of faith do that. She's like, I don't know what to do with this. This is what I'm going to do, is tell all of you. So I'm in the audience and I'm crying my eyes out. I'm like, whoa, what is going on with me? And my husband's looking at me, and I'm trying to hide from the kids because they don't see mommy cry. I'm crying. And I realized I have to do something. What can I do? Oh, I write. That's what I'm going to do. And so I just made a decision. I remember even telling two of my writer friends, they were looking at me like, you're going to write about what? Are you sure you're going to, why? And then that was the first why, because people kept asking me. And at first I was like, because it's important and human trafficking is a bad thing. But because I got the question so often, I realized, okay, I need to know why I'm doing this. And the reason is that, again, I'm not going to go into specifics because I realize I don't have to. All you need to know is I was going on a certain path in my life when I was younger, teenager and early 20s, and I could have ended up in that lifestyle. I could have chosen that super easy many times. There were certain choices that I made. The book was not a great shield entirely. It could only take me so far. So I realized that there's that, you know. Um, and also through my research, I'll say I started writing about human trafficking and human trafficking survivors. And I wrote about them for my book, Object Lesson. And in my research, I found out that most of those women are trafficked, that are enticed into it. It's modern day slavery, is what it is. Most of them are very vulnerable, and they come out of, guess where? Foster care, that they've had that experience. That was so big for me. I was crying in that sermon, and I didn't even know that stat. There's some other like really disturbing stats, like 90% of them, if not more, if not all, have been sexually abused as children, usually in the home by step parents or boyfriends living in the home. A crazy amount. I'm not Native American, but this is just an interesting stat. Interesting, like just something people should know. But a huge number of Native American women are trafficked. It's like disproportionate given the number of them that exist. So this is like all this stuff I'm finding out. And so I'm writing poems about it. And it's like really like, I feel like I'm an insane person writing about these things. And I realize I have to create some ground rules, and I do. That I decided I'm going to interview people and get their consent. But if they've already given an interview, I kind of took that as tacit consent. So I would write some persona poems. So in my book, Object Lesson, there are persona poems in the voice of trafficking survivor, because I am not a trafficking survivor, even though, as I said, there's some things that I went through that led me. I have to, I decided I'm going to be honest and tell people, because they want to know, is that why you're writing about this? And I also decided to give back to the community. And for a time, I volunteered and taught poetry workshops at a local safe house. And I got to know the women there and interviewed many of them and the workers there, and did some events with the group that runs the safe house. Amira is what it's called. It's here north of Boston. So I'm actually going to read one of the poems from there. Actually, I'm going to read two, but all right. So this is for survivors of abuse and trafficking residing at the Breaking Free Safe House in Minneapolis, Minnesota. Bird. Rock wren? Godwit? Bobolink? What are we looking at? What's beaked and broken free from? A classic iron bell cage with a blown out hole opposite a latched door. No thickened keratin could peck that well. No claw turned fist busted up that joint. Inside, she was key. She was cheap. She was a flipped bad finger. Now, this bird wings, as every bird stepping out of the life, with no credit, no reference, and a little self-love. What are we looking at? A second wind, the flight inside the creature that is the holy, eternal verb, is who bent the metal, is the mother of a lighter bone, the kind that terror cannot allow. And so in Object Lesson, as I said, there are persona poems. That was more narrative voice. I just wanted to kind of give you an overview poem about, the lifestyle that they were living and the women coming out of it. But there are also some personal poems in here. And this is one of them. And it talks about my mom's experience, what made her vulnerable. So remember, I said when I was younger, she was very vulnerable. Otherwise, why would she be with a guy that had, my dad had severe PTSD, like 100%. And I'm going to say more about him later, but she was super vulnerable, and this is one of the circumstances. So this is called oh well, this has an epigraph. Columbia senior Emma Sokowitz has been hauling her own dorm mattress around campus every day because the student she says raped her is still free to attend the school without formal consequences. And that's from an article in Slate magazine. And based on that story, a hashtag was created for then Twitter. It's called hashtag carry that weight. My mom was broken by 5 or 6 guys one dawn before I was born. That's got to be the weight of a king. And she carried that right past the police station on Burbank around noon. I consider carrying our queen-sized around our apartment like those students for Emma from around the globe, but I'm just a weaker upper body. I take on my daughter's futon. My mom got it for her at IKEA. It's a lightweight, and the idea is to lug it for about an hour at home, right as I go. Some kind of science, some kind of art, in order to relate. My daughter moves stuffed dogs and pigs off her quilt, helps me slide the pony-colored twin onto my spine. She makes me a tortoise. She takes pictures. Smile, smile, smile. I don't think I can bear it a minute. It's hers, my daughter's, my mother's, all the grand hers, and I won't where I teach. I teach, so I'd mulled hauling it to the university. But taking on a big thing like that, sweating, bending under that, you know what lives under a bed. All the weight of my frame thumps the ground in the kitchen as I dump the thing hard. My daughter rolls on it, giggles. My pen's gone. And my mom was broken by 5 or 6 guys one dawn before I was born. Yeah, so that her experience really affected me. Having talked to her, it sounded like they were trying to get her to be in that lifestyle, because that's what happens a lot with the survivors. What they told me was that some girls would just be groomed by one guy and get pulled into the life, and like he would be their boyfriend. But some girls were gang raped, like my mom was, and they would just be like, "You're here now, this is your life," and they would just keep her there. And the way she got away from that circumstance was like most of the guys left, and there was just one guy left with her in the apartment where this all happened, and he just left the room, and she just got up and left. I guess he thought she wasn't going to do that, but she just got up and wandered away and left, and that's how she got out of that circumstance. But that changed my whole life. That changed her whole life, obviously, but it's like generational. It goes on. And so I felt like I had to write this book to write out all these things. That's one thing that writing does. It gets it outside of you. It's like I've said this to my students a lot. It's like putting it in a container, and so you could look at it in a container and say, it's not me, this circumstance. It's there. It's a thing that's there. It is not me. Like, I don't have to take this on. Also, therapy taught me that, and going to church taught me that too. But poetry and writing in general has helped that too. And one other thing, this will help me go into the next topic. Well, maybe not. Let me think. Is that I felt like I was translating the experience. So that's one thing a writer does. In my notes, I have like I wasn't going to go into translation. I actually got into translation. So it's like a nice segue, but it's not chronological. So let's return to that translation thing. I actually want to mention that after I did Object Lesson and I was in this other world, I felt like I could return back into talking about my own life again, the details and the stories in a new way. And so I started this new manuscript called The Pacific. And in that, I started to look at my childhood from like I don't know how to explain it. I don't want to say from an eco lens. It's more like it was wider. It wasn't like just this narrow little story like that We poem was, The Garden Apartments. It it incorporated the entire landscape of California. I mean, look, I have like this ocean picture behind me. I became obsessed with remembering sitting here in Salem, Massachusetts, remembering California and the landscape and the location of where all these things happened there, like post arriving after foster care. And I started to write that book, The Pacific. And please let me know if I'm getting close to my time because I'll shorten everything. I'm fine. Okay. Because I want to read you all this poem, The Pacific, because I just want to show like there was a growth. After I did this, I let all this stuff out with the object lesson and I let myself be the translator for those experiences. My poetry changed. It opened up into a different landscape. So here's this poem, The Pacific. There were no road rails. I remember no road rails and the depth off the cliffs we motored along. I remember speed in a parched Chevy clunker that could not have sped, and bench seats and no buckles and bare thighs peeling off faux leather at every hairpin. Every elevated canyon mile was a feat, but a breath of less slickened air too, less cog and fume, a winding away from the wavering sea leg steam off blinding sidewalks, infinite sidewalks and other shoeless kids kicking rusted palm leaves outside infinite apartment complexes, away from our corner of the valley of concrete corners, of no evidence of valley besides boulders stacked in the distance of every vista. The driver was a stranger, was my mother after my whole life had passed with stranger after stranger, was my mother after 7 years, and me at 7 years, with her driving that snuff-colored Nova from her blinding valley, not a valley, through Laurel, Topanga, Malibu, canyons, all the way to some fantastic, to her beloved blue, eucalyptus choking local growth the whole trek, and the cooling air as we efforted west, and the jolt of a castle, the castle in a distant crook of a range that hid the slate of the ocean, made me want to stop moving, but not stop here. I remember hoping to find hermit crabs the size of the mole on my right side chin, and if I tethered them to a stick, they'd line up by mass and trade shells, find homes that fit, and there'd be one left without, one torn out. A book said, a scientist leaned into wet sand, watched a torn crab die in the beak of a gull. I can't remember if I saw that death or read it. I remember watching a wrong castle tucked into a wrong mountain notch on the chin of the sky, like the hermit mole on my chin if my face were the sky. It's a beauty mark, my mother had said. Don't pick at it. I eyed that smoking stranger at the wheel and dug my nail in as the Pacific swelled into view that first time. Okay, so I don't know how well I read that. I stumbled over a few things. That's in Poetry Magazine, actually. So if you want to take a look at that poem, you can go and at the Poetry Foundation website and look up The Pacific by me. So it's huge. It's like, for me, that was like movement and all the words, and it's like I call it my kitchen sink poems. Everything but the kitchen sink, or everything and the kitchen sink is in there. The landscape is going on. And so I have this manuscript developing, and it's it's not been taken yet, I have to say. In fact, I got a rejection today. How awful. How dare they say no? But in any case, I was able to put a smaller book together from that manuscript, and it's a chapbook. It's this right here behind me, Voz, which is Portuguese for voice. Oh, I didn't say my background is, on my dad's side, I'm Cape Verdean, which is what used to be a subsidiary of Portugal. So yeah, being on the East Coast now, I explored that side of my heritage. And so there's Vo's, voice, and except for this is like the California sun going on there. So I plucked out all these poems from the Pacific, and I put them in here. And all the poems in here are actually focused on music. I just plucked the poems out that had to do with music because that was a big part of my childhood was my mom's music. I separate that in my head. That's her music. And then I love jazz. She could not care less about jazz. So that's my music. Her music is all from the 60s and the 70s. And as I said earlier in the beginning, my dad was very obsessed with the Doors. Well, I grew up listening to Doors over and over and over and over. I almost thought I liked the Doors, but then I realized one day I'm not sure what I think about the Doors, because there was also this myth, like a family myth, that my dad was almost the drummer for the Doors. And I found out later that that was never true, that he was, as I said earlier, obsessed with them, and that I talked to his best friend that he had growing up and also in LA. And this guy told me, no, your dad actually jumped on stage at the Hollywood Bowl and he just tried to take over and he got pulled off by the cops. And that's the story of my dad and the Doors, not that he was he was almost the drummer. He was like, there's no way he was almost the drummer. That's what the best friend said. So anyway, so I wrote a poem. Again, it incorporates landscape a lot more. So it's this eco element, but it's in Vose, so it's about music, and it's a special kind of ekphrastic called that I label a saturation. So I gave it that name. I own that name no, but I gave it that name, saturation, special kind of ekphrastic, and that's what this poem is. It's called The Doors of Perception. My father leapt on stage at the Hollywood Bowl to grab drum and cymbal sticks from a star. He wanted to be a star, a door, white. Security thugs dragged him off John Densmore. He saw doors everywhere. He saw doors everywhere. At the Whiskey, the Beanery, the Magic Mountain Fest, and in primary colors, in Windward, Oakwood, or north of Rose. He wanted to forget war in Venice, to be a door in Venice, and face the faux canals. Later, he flew to Paris to pay homage to the door who died with a head of Alexandrian hair. He carried huge pale poppies to the Poets' Corner in the Père Lachaise, to this stranger under a cream coffin door nailed shut. He said, break on through. He put a poppy in his pocket like a receipt and chased daylight till he landed in LA, saw a wave of white stars rippling on the Pacific on new moon nights when the ever-present rust cloud was blown out to sea. He found a motel room door, particle door, and shut it on all that he owned for 50 years. He lived there, adding up primary colors, hour to hour, in bliss consciousness, crossing his legs on the bed, letting electric snow hush the TV, hush gunfire and blood. He forgot his father's Cabo Verde and let himself be Italian there, a different kind of Venetian, because who he really was too close to Black. So what the ending is telling is that my dad's his as I said, the heritage is Cape Verdean, and that's a mixed race culture. So I know that my father's family wasn't too keen on that, on being mixed race. They, coming here to America, they just weren't too happy to spread that around. So that's what's discussed in here. That's the too close to Black reference, and the Cabo Verde reference to alludes to that. So yeah, there's this of those. There's more saturations in there. Almost gonna wrap up here. So I mentioned translation. So after being done with the human trafficking stories and then getting into my own stuff, I felt like my world was kind of blooming in my writing life. I'm here in Salem. We have I helped start a statewide poetry festival here, the Mass Poetry Festival. Well, I didn't start it, but I helped bring it to Salem, where it is still located, and I was one of their super volunteers and really making it, grow here. And through I started making poetry connections and just meeting a lot of people, publishing a lot more. And through all these connections, I was recommended by someone to participate in a group of women artists who wanted to start a collective. They wanted to start an international collective, putting Iraqi women artists together with American women artists. And so I was asked to interview, to have somebody interview me for this, to be part of this. And I just thought, this is amazing. I wonder why they chose me. And I asked the guy that recommended me. He's the founder of Mass Poetry Festival, Michael and Sarah. And he said, well, I just felt like you've worked with women, and these Iraqi women have had like incredible horrors happen in their country because of America and the West in general. And I just felt like that was in your wheelhouse, your interest. And I just felt like if you were called to go to the Middle East, you would do it. And I was like, what, really? I wasn't quite sure that I would actually do that part of it. But as it happens, I did end up going to Dubai with this group. And I bet that was in 2017. And they were fascinated by my work with the human trafficking issue. They were very pleased about it because that's something that goes on there. It's just, different, but it just looks different, but it's all the same kind of stuff with the Yazidi women that get persecuted over there and taken into sexual slavery. So yeah, I've been involved with that group. It's called Her Story Is, and I'm an organizer, and I work on projects with Iraqi women, and that's what I'm doing now. So as I said, I have The Pacific. That's my own work. I'm shopping around. But in the meantime, I've been working on a co-translation project. So I don't speak Arabic. I don't speak any other language except for English. So I work with an Iraqi poet named Hana Ahmed, and we work through a translator, and we're writing poems to each other and co-translating through the translator who speaks both languages, each other's work. And this collection of poem responses is what we're calling them, has been accepted for publication by Arrowsmith Press. It'll be out, I'm not sure actually, they say 2024 fall, but I think maybe 2025. I'm not sure. So in any case, soon it will be out. We're still putting the finishing touches on our poems, but it's amazing. It's really just fascinating work. It's like my world grew and grew and grew through reading. Writing has brought me to new places. I don't think I said this statistic earlier, that I found out only 3% of people who've been in foster care ever go to college, like ever even go to college. When I found that out, I was so shocked. I just thought, wow, I get it, because there was a lot to recover, just having that absent parent and being shuttled around and all the awful things that I'm not going to bring up that happened. I'm not surprised in that way, but I feel like really I've been blessed in my life, and that writing and reading has been part of that. Said like also God and church, but in therapy, but also writing, just really key part of processing all the things going on with me. And it brought me to this place where I can have this experience that I'm having now with Dr. Hana Ahmed, writing back and forth. And do I have time to share one of the poems? I don't want to. I do? Okay, great. So I'm going to share. And this poem, if I can find it, talks about my father also. One of the last times I saw him in person, because I actually reconnected with him. I found him in Hollywood, and he did it, as the Doors of Perception said, he shut the door for 50 years is one of the lines, because he did. He lived in in various motels for his whole life. Like from the time that he was with my mom, they were in apartments, and then they separated. He just was in motels for the rest of his life in Hollywood. I asked him, what do you do all day? He just said, I walk. So he just would walk, and he would just live off of he would get the veterans checks. And he had people that knew him, and when I'd visit him, I'd go to the Denny's restaurant that he would go to every single day. They knew him. They're like, hey, Joe. And I was like, they know him better than I know him, because I didn't reconnect to him for many years because it was difficult. But I'm glad I did. And I got to know him and have some semblance of a father-daughter relationship of some kind, as much as he could handle, because he was very far gone. He was diagnosed with schizophrenia from his PTSD. So, okay, so here's this poem, and is there anything else? Oh, it's another kitchen sink one. So buckle up. Everything is in this. It's called The Falconers. I don't know you yet, Hannah. I don't know if you've heard of Tinseltown, if you'd ever be drawn to this palace of narrative, this hero's journey peddler, though this plot is programmed to receive our kind. We are potential creators. We chase denouement. We'd begin together, walk west on Sunset Boulevard, away from the Industry of Death Museum, towards Hollywood High. Pause under a grimy awning at the Budget Inn, the final place my war-torn father held me. It was so odd. He'd held me once before, 48 years before. It'd been 1 year of the rat to another year of the rat. The cobalt sky slouched against us each time. This time, the door to a drug rehab center kept slamming open. Then I let him go home to his motel room. I turned west. Let's race west together, Hannah, and let that scene be happy, a small image out of Spiritus Mundi. Above us, so many dull brass stars litter Vine Street, where all tourists trek. Let's be human together instead, outstrip the setting sun. We'll need to be Californian. We'll need a convertible, though I hate those things. The sky and its potential poisons always enter. A glittering burn enters. And if you want to drive, drive. Outpace the autumn light with one arm on the door, with one hand on the wheel, wind around the warm Santa Ana winds, point out every transplanted palm, every perched kestrel, pull in at the end of the boulevard at Gladstone's beach, and together in this lot, we'll face the cotton candy cumulus, the periwinkle glow over cold ocean motions. With our words, we'll remake every fake enamel falcon into a gift, into freedom in clean air. We'll rewrite this town, make true all silver screen sisterhoods, all the stuff that dreams are made of. So I just threw everything, Maltese Falcon, the Eagles, the Spiritus Mundi, that references, oh my gosh, I'm forgetting the poem, it's famous poem. Oh, it's Yeats from The Second Coming. There's so much in there. I think I mentioned also, what's that? There's the convertible movie, Susan Sarandon and Gina Davis. They go out in the convertible. Everything, it's all in there. And my dad. So yeah, so that's showing where I'm at. I guess I'd say that the last thing I'll mention is that through Her Story Is, I'm not only doing that one project with Hannah, but I'm the lead editor on an anthology of Arab women's poetry, and that's coming out in late 2025 through Tupelo Press. And so that's women from 22 different nations. And I'm working with like a team of co-translators, and that'll come out. So good things came out of my life. I have to say I feel very blessed. I've got a great family. I love my husband and my kids. So all is well, and a lot of it is owed to the power of poetry and the power of words. So thank you very much.
That was really incredible. Thank you so much, Jennifer. Oh gosh, I feel like I've walked along with you through your whole life. It was just the way that you described it was so evocative and powerful. I just wanted to ask you a couple of questions, and if there are other people that would like to have questions, if you would prefer to chat them in, if you don't want to unmute yourself, feel free to do that. Well, I wanted I have a couple of questions, actually. I was just wondering, it seems a lot of your writing is biographical. And
Yes.
that, to me, if it was me, it would make me feel very vulnerable, especially with the background that you've had and the struggles that you've gone through and the difficulties in your upbringing and everything. And I wonder if you'd struggled with that, the opening up and putting your vulnerabilities on a page, if you will.
Um, a little bit I have throughout my writing life. I no longer do. I think I hit a point where I just realized I don't have to write about this everything, and I don't write about everything. So I think what happens with some writers where it seems like they have this intense stuff, they actually are probably just, well, I don't know if they are, but I'm just putting forward the stuff I'm totally comfortable putting forward. Do you know what I mean? Like the stuff that I want hidden in private is hidden in private and people don't know, and I have a phrase I tell myself is like, people can ask any question, but I don't have to answer every question. There's no, I'm not obliged to do that. That has actually served me in many various places in my life, like all across. It's boundary setting is really what it is. Because I think early on, like I remember being 20 something and wanting to open up about everything, and even someone then was like, you don't have to say everything to everybody. I know you want to be honest, because that's what I said. I was like, I just want to be honest. It was like kind of killing me, to be honest, that I just didn't need to, especially if I worked out some stuff like through therapy. Like I really don't see poetry as therapy in a strict sense, I should say. It's an art form and it can have the effects of being therapeutic for the writer. But if it's the only means to therapy, I think that's not good. I think a person who's doing that should see an actual therapist. And then the poetry thing is on the side, because I believe myself, I'm an artist. Like I pay attention to the craft. And I think that poets, you know, if they're pursuing it seriously, should do that. But if you're just, if it's a hobby, then like, craft, whatever, it's fun. You can create community, it's fun. There's different levels of it, but definitely the therapy part, it just cannot serve it like as therapy entire. So
It just seems like it requires a lot of self-reflection, and sometimes that can lead one down a dark rabbit hole. And like, so yeah, I
yes.
think you definitely want to have that therapy in your back pocket. So
Yeah.
yeah. And I was just curious because it's National Library Week next week,
Oh,
and I was curious if you could talk about the place that libraries perhaps played in your love of books and
oh,
eventually in poetry. No.
oh my gosh, I lived at libraries. They did. Oh wow. I remember I had this huge stack, like when I was young, I guess I was about the same height. I just remember being like 12 or 13 or something, still my height. And it was like up to here, just stack of books. And my brother comes into my room and he's like, what is all that? And I was like, they're my library books. And he started just looking at them because he never read. He knew how to read, but he was just never reading. And he's like, these are overdue. And I was like, they are? Oh. I just had this huge, like I had so many like library books all the time, like stacks. That wasn't the only time. Like I would just like, because I'd have to pay, I guess it's still the same. But when I was younger, I just would check out books and forget and just have stacks. I read everything, like even books that I wasn't even interested in. Like I would go into the library, and I remember they'd have those turning things, and I would just need a reading fix. I never did drugs, actually. I'm proud to say, but I did read like a fiend, and I just would just pick out anything, and I read even fantasy novels, which I wasn't that into, but I just was like, I need a book. Okay, I'm reading this fantasy novel series by David Eddings. I still remember it because it was pretty good, but I was like, I'm fantasy, okay. And then that's how I read Lord of the Rings too. I was like, oh, there's Lord of the Rings. Okay, I guess I'm reading Lord of the Rings from the library. So libraries were just a safe place for me, where I could read those books and ask about books too. That's another thing. Librarians did help and direct me. Like that first story I told you was in the library. She didn't tell me what to get, but she directed me. Yeah, I I I love libraries.
Do you remember the first time you came across a book of poetry or a poem in particular that made you fall in love with poetry, or was it a slow burn kind of a thing?
I guess it was a slow burn because I was introduced through writing poet. I don't remember the poems that they taught us as much as the writing assignments through teachers. Um, I do remember when I went to college and I made the switch over from psych to creative writing, that Sylvia Plath really struck me. And so I did a deep dive on Sylvia Plath for many years. And also I just pulled myself out of that and I realized, okay, this isn't all there is. Like, she has limited number of books. She only has Ariel, actually, and then some other books that her ex Ted Hughes put together posthumously. But yeah, so I'd say Sylvia Plath would be the first poet that I remember loving and getting into and being actively influenced by. I pulled away
And
because I found out she committed suicide, and I was like, oh, I don't want to get too into her.
little
Yeah,
dark.
yeah, it was a little too dark.
And then I was curious, is your husband a writer as well?
No, he's actually a composer, classical composer. He's eclectic, classical composer and metalhead in a hardcore metal band as the lead guitar. he's
Gosh.
he has these like, and he loves jazz, thank God. He's very eclectic, but he comes to all my poetry events that he can come to. He has his favorites. He's interested. He's been trained. This makes sense for him as a musician to listen to poetry. Like, he picks things up because he doesn't go around reading it, but he's a very intelligent man, so he's like listening to all these poets. He's heard all the greats that are alive today. We've gone to so many events, and his commentary is astute. He's right on with it, but he does not write, though.
And I was wondering if you could talk a little bit about your impressions about when you met the women that you're translating with, the ones that would you say was from Iran, Iraq? I'm sorry, I forget which one it
Iraq.
was. The life style must be so very different from what we're used to. I was wondering if you could comment on that.
Well, what's interesting is, so the woman that I'm working with, Dr. Hana Ahmed, she's from Mosul, Iraq. What's interesting about her, she's the one I'm doing the Where Do You Live book that's coming out, like I said, either fall or next spring through Aerosmith Press. She's very private. So she's like, she and I have a lot in common. And as I mentioned, like, I don't tell everything. She really doesn't tell everything. I don't know if she's married, or understand her situation. She doesn't want to say it. It's like she's the embodiment of tell all the truth, but tell it slant, which is a line by Emily Dickinson. She's just, I try to ask her, and she tries to tell me through the translator, but I can see her, she thinks she's speaking straight, but she's not. She's like, I'll tell you my story. And then the story is all metaphoric and like slant. I can't get a hold of it. So I'm not quite sure through her, because she went through war is what it is. So Mosul was in 2014, not by America, but I think by some proxies that America was involved with, was severely bombed. And she had terrible wartime experiences in 2014. And I was connected with her in 2017, so not long after. So she's still recovering from that. And I remember early on in 2017, I'd be on a Zoom call and she'd be late, and they'd be like, well, there was some bomb went off, so she's just waiting for something to calm down. Yeah. And the other women, they're just like, they're amazing because they defy all I don't know if they defy all convention. They do it. They know the boundaries that they can work within, and then they press up against them. They don't go outside the boundaries. Like, one of the women we were working with, she was telling us a story when in Dubai about her, how she was the third wife of somebody that had two other wives at the time. Like, that was just a normal situation. She just happened to be the third wife, and he was some high-ranking military guy. She had like crazy story, and she's this amazing artist. Now she has her own artist studio. So I don't understand like exactly how they don't all wear the hijab. Hana does, but the other women don't that our group works with. We always try to ask, like, so are you Muslim? Do you practice? They don't want to say. It's also very cultural, is what I can understand. So I'm not being very helpful to you because I don't know much. I really don't. And so the book is called Where Do You Live? Because it's where do you live in your soul? Where do you live in reality? And so my hope is that people will read it and less about me, especially Americans, like, okay, this is another American. But for her, our conversation, like seeing that play out, like trying to get at the information. And she's also trying to understand, like, she wrote a poem about my life in my childhood, because I told her some of this stuff I told everybody here. And she did a persona poem. And I was like, whoa, it blew my mind. I don't know why. Hopefully it makes sense why it would blow my mind. She had compassion towards me. She's like, wow, that sounds really bad. I was like, well, you went through war. Like, that sounds pretty bad to me. But it's just, we're equals, actually, is the thing. In the end, is that what I'm realizing. So yes, the life is different, but she mostly has to, I think she and the others, they realize that the boundaries are constantly shifting and they're working within it so that they can be artists and they can help other women, because that's what they're all about. They're that group of Iraqi women that I engage with.
Wonderful. Amazing. Well, we've gone over our time. I thank you so much, Jennifer, for being here with us and helping us celebrate National Poetry Month. It's been absolutely fascinating. This session is being recorded and it'll be posted to the Pam Ridge Library website for any of you who have friends who weren't able to join us and would like to watch it at another time. So again, thank you, Jennifer. It's been a wonderful evening.
Thank you so much.
Good night, everyone.
Good night.